My name is Leon Evans. I'm one of 6 pilots that fly this airplane out of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, located in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And I had the pleasure of flying this airplane about 17 years ago. I've been on it a long time, but the thing that amazes me is when this airplane finished its service with the Air Force, it was put on 3 pedestals in Goderich, Ontario, Canada, and stayed there for 40 years. We took this airplane back in June, celebrating the 60th anniversary to the day that the airplane was actually on those pedestals. And we picked it up in 1977. The Air Force carried it with a big Chinook helicopter. We took it apart, brought it down to Canada, and started restoration in 1978. 10 years later, we flew it for the first time September the 11th. That was 1988. Warplane Heritage Museum, located in Hamilton, Canada, has been around since 1974, probably before that, when the idea sprung up. We had 4 founding forefathers, and they decided to get a warplane between them, and that was a Fairey Firefly. It looks like a Spitfire. It's a heavier version with a big Griffin engine. And then the accumulation started, the B-25 and Chipmunks and Cornells, Tiger Moths and Stearmans. We have 18 airplanes we fly, but over 40 airplanes in our collection. I'm very fortunate. I get to fly the Lank and the B-25 and the DC-3, Harvards and Stearmans. So I'm a very lucky man. The museum, the main object of the museum is to acquire, maintain, restore, and document aircraft flown by the Royal Canadian Air Force. That's our mandate. And we restore airplanes in our hangar. You can come in at any time and see. We've got 2 or 3 under restoration right now. Ultimately, they will fly. But it takes a lot of work, and it's all done by volunteers. And as our boss says, if he had to pay minimum salary to our volunteers, we'd have to shut down in a day. So this airplane is maintained by a group of 20 or more volunteers. Yes, the chief engineer and our house mechanics and maintenance people, they supervise, but it's the volunteers that keep this going. I'm a volunteer pilot. This specific airplane is a development of the Avro Manchester, which was a twin-engine bomber with the same fuselage you see behind me, but powered by Vulture engines, which were experimental 24-cylinder engines that really didn't work. They got permission to put 4 Merlin engines on this airplane and test it, and it became a match made in heaven, just like the P-51 Mustang getting its Merlin engine and how it developed. So the Merlin engine, you have to remember, 1941, 1942, the Battle of Britain was still on, and there was still a threat of invasion of England. So they were reluctant to let these Merlin engines go anywhere else but to fighters. But this airplane was given the permission to have them tested, and it became that, like I said, match made in heaven. It's a heavy lift bomber. It carries 12,000 pounds of bombs one way to Berlin and back from England. That's a long haul, 8 hours. First of all, it carried the heaviest bomb load in World War II, 22,000 pound Grand Slam bomb, 12,000 pound tall boy bomb, which sank the Tirpitz into the German battleship. It also carried the 9,000 pound bouncing bomb, which was an upkeep, they called it, and that destroyed the Ruhr dams and affected the German manufacturing industry. This airplane also dropped food to the starving Dutch. So it wasn't just a weapon of war, which we know it is, but it also fed people that were starving. Some of those people were the German soldiers themselves in Holland. So other duties this airplane did during D-Day, this squadron of these airplanes flew back and forth on a horizontal path, slowly progressing towards Dieppe, making the Germans think on their radar screens that it was the invasion fleet. Another distraction. Whether they fell for it or not, we don't know, but it looked like an invasion fleet probably. The Lancaster bomber was a single pilot airplane, which made it a little bit narrower than some other bombers of World War II, which also meant less drag and greater speeds. I've already said it was a very heavy lift bomber. It carried up to 22,000 pounds of bombs. It also carried 15,500 pounds of fuel. You couldn't do both. So you'd have to have a target in mind and how much fuel to get there and back and how many bombs can you carry. Sad, horrible thing to think that way, isn't it? The engines, of course, are Merlin engines, Rolls-Royce Merlins, but these Rolls-Royce Merlins were built under license by Packard in Detroit, so they're Packard Merlins, same as your P-51 Mustang. Whereas there's no difference to the engine, it's just the way they were built. In Detroit, they were like Henry Ford on a conveyor belt, and in England, people would get, individual mechanics would get a box of engine parts and put it together. So, power-wise, it's a 27.02 liter engine. It has basically a 1,300 horsepower capability, but during World War II they could get 150 and 160 octane fuel, and this engine then would produce for every cubic inch it would produce a horsepower. That's significant. In World War II the big push was for a 2,000 horsepower engine. Well, this was getting close. It's a small engine. You know, the Daimler-Benz and the Messerschmitts, they were 33 liter engines, and other aircraft were 37 liter. Nobody got to 2,000. Well, some did, but this did a lot for its little engine. Well, this airplane was built in 1945, just after war. So it entered the services of the Canadian Armed Forces, Royal Canadian Air Force, and served maritime patrol. And on one bad landing, the airplane's right wheel broke and the engines hit the ground and the wing bent a little, so there was an opportunity then to scrap the airplane. Someone had located a Lancaster in the Midwest of Canada that was being used as a chicken coop. And that man was willing to give us that part of his airplane. So that part of the airplane that we received had been in combat. So part of this airplane, and that's between the two inside engines and the fuselage, that part of the airplane served in the war.